Hello everyone, my name is Josh and welcome to Whims. And today I'm going to give you my review for the 1981 film called Possession. And Possession is a film written and directed or co-written and directed by Andrej Zulawski, who is a Polish film director. And this is the only film that I've actually seen of his, but having watched this film, it really has made me interested to see the rest of his filmography and see what else he has to offer. But the film stars Sam Neill and Isabella Ajani, who play a couple by the name of Mark and Anna. And Mark, we first meet Mark coming home from business abroad. And you don't really get to know that much about his profession in the film, but we get the impression that he works for the government in some capacity. Maybe he's like a government official, maybe he's something of a spy or something along those lines. And that kind of makes it really interesting because there's the Berlin Wall in this film as well that's constantly used throughout the film. Towards the latter half of the film, the Berlin Wall is very often referenced and utilised in this film. But I feel like that he's something of a spy or some sort of government agent or someone who works for a larger authority. And that's very interesting in regards to the themes that this film explores, which I'm going to get into in a minute. But the film basically follows Mark and Anna, and when Mark returns home from abroad having done business, he ends up being confronted with a very domestic situation. His wife is beside herself and she doesn't know what to do. So basically they go into the house and they start to talk things over. And when they start to reconnect, she says she's had an affair with someone else. And upon hearing this, Mark is absolutely beside himself and he doesn't know what to do. In fact, he literally, the very next scene in which we see him, he's basically beside himself. He hasn't shaved for a very long time. He stops bathing. He looks like a mess and he's just sort of lying in bed in a very fetal position, calling people on the phone, trying to get in touch with Anna, trying to get to know who is this man that you've been seeing. And the whole entire film, for a good portion of it, it pretty much plays like a drama, almost like a Lars von Trier film like Antichrist or Melancholia or any of those other, more dramatic films, or The Breaking of the Waves or Dancer in the Dark, those films where it mostly focuses on drama, but there still is very dark subject matter underpinning the more, morose and more, darker and more atmospheric sequences. Whereas in the case of Andrej Zulawski, he really does a good job of really kind of projecting a lot of his own insecurities into these scenes, because from what I've read, it turns out that Andrej Zulawski was going through a very difficult divorce at the time when he was writing Possession, and he basically wanted to essentially write the ultimate horror film, or the ultimate film in regards to depicting relationships when they're breaking down, and really try to analyse what goes on in a relationship when you go into it, because that's something that I really like about this film as well, is it really analyses what goes wrong in a relationship, but it analyses relationships as a whole as well, which I really like. I like the fact that you are sort of almost asking the question that if you were ever in a relationship, how much of you, especially when it becomes a relationship where there's a child involved, how much of that relationship becomes purely about you? How much of you is left when it's over? And that's or when it's fully realised. Like, you're no longer, when you get involved in a marriage or when you get involved in a relationship, you're no longer just thinking about yourself. You're thinking about other people. You're thinking about, what you're going to do to support this one person. And then that one person will eventually become a child, and then that will hopefully be another child, and so on and so forth. But the whole entire point of this film that it's trying to make is basically, what did Anna do to really warrant her having this affair with this very strange, eccentric fellow? And that Mark meets, and he actually ends up getting the shit beaten out of him at one point. But what I really like is that it really does analyse what happens to you when you go through this point in your marriage where you think to yourself, it's okay if I do this, but then what is actually going on in Anna's head when she actually does go and have the affair? She says she feels very trapped, or she feels very alone, and she felt like she really needed someone. But that's kind of the thing that happens. How much of you is actually still there when you get involved in marriage? And there's even that moment where, Mark says you have to, say no. You have to phone him. You have to tell him how you're really feeling. It doesn't matter if you love him. He's not your family. We're your family. And it's one of those things where he's starting to use both him and his son, Bob, or Bobby as I like to call him, as more of a reason to stay. Like, this is your reason why you should break it off, because he is not your family, we are your family. But here's the thing, she doesn't want to feel like she's being bogged down by a family. She wants to go out and she wants to have this affair. Maybe it's because she's going through psychological issues. And that's the big thing. The film Possession, although a lot of people might look at this film's title and say to themselves, oh, this film's about possession, it's about, someone getting possessed by a demon or something, and then they turn their heads around 360 and start shouting, profanities at the camera, and, looking demented, and, having their bones and their back twitch and things like that. But in reality, the film is much more multi-layered than that. The film is basically about, in one area, you could say it is about possession, about the idea of losing control, which is essentially what possession is when you look at stuff like The Exorcist or any of those other sorts of films about possession, like Beyond the Door and things like that. But in reality, that's what one area of it's like. The idea of losing control, the idea of losing control of your sanity, the idea of losing control of your sense of self, which is what happens to Anna when she gets involved in this marriage. And her and Mark also feel that way as well, where he sort of feels like he's losing his sense of self, he's losing control, having found out that his wife has had this affair. Like, when we first meet him, he's lifting up his bags and then dropping his bags and then, trying to do stuff with his hands. Like, he doesn't know what to do with himself when he first meets his wife again, and they start talking. And that I thought was very interesting. And I really like the fact that there's almost like a mirror image thing going on. When she first opens up and confesses to him at the restaurant, they're basically facing away from each other, and they're talking very aggressively in very high voices, very aggressive voices. But there's like this mirror behind them, and they're sort of like turning, you can sort of see their reflections, but their reflections are quite distorted. That I thought was very interesting, because it plays into something that happens later on in the film. And what I really like about this is it really just goes to show that both these characters have their own little moments where they're losing control. Mark's version of this scene is when they're at the restaurant and he finds out that she's having the affair, and that she really just feels like he did things for me in bed that you could never do and things like that. And he like has this massive meltdown where he's just screaming at her and and sort of like running through the restaurant and saying things like, get out, and he's like throwing a chair at her. And then it gets so crazy that even the staff members of the restaurant have to literally come in and literally, pin him down and keep him calm. And I really thought that was a really insane scene. But then Anna has her own version of that scene. It's probably one of the most memorable scenes in the film, where she's coming home from either going to go and see this stranger who she's met and had this affair with, and she has like bags of groceries, and she's like walking up the escalator, and she's starting to laugh originally, and she's like cackling almost, like she's going and things like that. Like, she's really laughing, and you can hear the echo. But then she starts to very slowly scream and shout, and then she starts to basically throw her arms around, and she starts to convulse. And there's even this moment where she cracks the bag against the wall, and things like, an egg shatters, and you can see the yolk like sort of, being spread across the wall, the graffitied wall, and then you sort of see the milk splash as well and sort of leak out everywhere, leak all over the bag and things like that. And that's obviously a very symbolic way of showing that she's having something of sort of like a breakdown, but then that also could hint at, something that happens to a lot of women when they go under a lot of stress in pregnancy as well. But I think it could be read as a very literal thing, but in that scene, it could be seen as a very a symbolic thing in the sense of that scene, but it is actually something that's literally happening to her. She is literally having a miscarriage in the middle of this, very, very, very grotty, very kind of grimy subway. And it really is horrible to watch, especially the scene where it just abruptly cuts to her on the ground and she is screaming, like she is in such pain, and she starts to scream, and then blood and foam starts to come out of her mouth, and she starts to scream. And honestly, the scream really is horrible to listen to. Like, hearing Isabella Adjani basically do that scream, and literally, can you imagine how many takes that must have taken to get that right, just to get that scream right, but then also to get the effects right, because she's literally, not only is she screaming of foam coming out of her mouth, but there's also blood appearing on her chest area, and there's also blood appearing where her shoulders are and things like that. And then of course the liquid, there's sort of like this milky liquid that's coming out from between her legs, and it's really horrible to watch, and it's almost like a very visual way of exploring the internal plane of what's going on inside of her, which is the fact that she's losing this child, she's losing this baby, and it's a really horrible moment. And it was one of those moments when I was watching this film where I literally said to myself, okay, I have to stop this film for a second and just take a minute, because this was a really hard scene to watch. And it really is horrible, and it really is wonderful. It's horrible, but I really do have to give special praise to Isabella Adjani for her performance in that scene, because that really is a hard scene to do, where she just basically, it just focuses on her, and it's an unbroken take, and then it eventually does cut to something else, but you do feel like you're just watching this scene, and it's happening in real time, and there's no edits, there's no CGI, it's just basically her having a breakdown in the middle of this very, very, very grotty underground subway, and she just basically collapses to the ground, and this thing happens to her, and it's really horrible. But also at the same time, it's a great way of showing that these two characters have both experienced the idea of losing control of your emotions, losing control of your entire self. And that's also played into with how the idea of possession also is played into how Mark sees Anna throughout the course of the film. Like when he goes out and he sees when he goes to his son's school, his son Bob's school, he sees a woman who looks exactly like Anna. Like, she literally has the same hair, she has the same eyes, she literally has the same face. It's literally played by Isabella Adjani. Like, that's literally the same actress, and she literally has greenish eyes, but she looks just like her. And there's even a moment where he grabs her by the wrist and he says, "What is this? Some kind of sick joke? What's wrong with you?" And she's like going, "I don't know you." And she's like laughing, and she's very scared, and she's very nervous, but then she's also very kind of like nervous, but then she's also kind of thinking to herself, "I'm safe. I know that, you know, I have to get the kids inside," and things like that. And it's really hard. It's a really strange scene, but it really kind of ties into, again, what happens in the film, which is a big spoiler alert for this film, by the way. So if you haven't seen Possession, please click off this video and go and watch it. It is an absolute roller coaster of emotions. It's basically The Wild Robot, but if it didn't have any light-hearted moments or any jokes, it basically is just a absolute emotional thrill ride from beginning to end. And that's essentially what this film is. It's basically the more extreme cinema version of something like, you know, The Wild Robot, where it was an emotional roller coaster, but that unlocked a lot of very positive emotions in me, whereas this kind of made me very cynical about the idea of ever going into a relationship or anything like that. It really is one of those films, but it really is a good film. It's not going to be for everyone, obviously, so if you haven't seen Possession, it's currently being shown on Amazon Prime, so if you do want to go and see it, please click off this video and go and watch it now. But this film does take a turn, and it takes a turn in a very interesting way, because what I really like about this particular development, so it basically all comes down to the fact that Mark is very curious about what Anna gets up to when she's not around their child, and when she's not around him. She starts to experience all these different things. Like in the very same scene where she talks about the flashback of her being in the subway, she also does something very crazy, which is where she takes all the clothes from off the floor and she shoves them into the fridge. They have this massive argument, and eventually this leads to her confessing that she had a miscarriage, which leads to that big breakdown scene that she has in the subway. And not only that, but he wants to actually follow her and find out where she goes when she goes out, and when she's not around, you know, Bob or anything like that. So they get a private investigator, and he follows her to this apartment, and inside this apartment is a strange tentacled apparition that doesn't seem human, but it's starting to develop human features, like the beginnings of a head and the beginnings of eyes. And that's a very bizarre thing, because to me, I feel like this is the moment, and a lot of people might say, oh, this moment comes out of nowhere, but this film has been building to this for such a long time. Like I said, during the scene in the restaurant where they're having that argument, there is a moment where they are literally facing a mirror, like a mirror's behind them, and they're literally on opposite sides. They're basically sitting at the same table, but they're on opposite sides, facing away from each other. There is a mirror behind them that, if you look very closely, their reflections are getting distorted, which kind of almost foreshadows this creature that Anna has been keeping alive and been feeding, and in effect also engaging in intercourse with. Yeah, you heard that right. She's also sleeping with this thing. And it's a really horrific idea because, of course, there's tentacles involved and all sorts of other things. And this private investigator, upon seeing this creature, he's absolutely terrified. So I like to think of it as, it's not really played literally. It's a very bizarre thing, because a lot of people could read this as, oh, this is basically her manifesting her, innermost desires, which is where she feels like she's very slowly starting to gain back control whenever people go into that apartment. And this is basically a manifestation of her gaining back her power, if I'm using very pretentious, feminist speak as sort of like a word here. It does feel almost like she's gaining back control, but she's gaining back control through her infidelity, through her, through her power and all the rest of it. But what's very interesting is she actually flirts with the private investigator, and she says, "Oh, have a glass of wine." And he actually gets very nervous, and he's like going, "No, I have a family." And it's like, "Oh, I see, he's gay." And it's even more horrible, because then she takes a broken piece of bottle and she just shoves it in his neck, and it's really horrible. And honestly, Isabella Adjani is terrifying in this film. She goes through a full spectrum of emotions in this film. She goes from being very brutal and very harsh to being very emotional, and you're almost kind of sympathetic to her, to being downright terrifying. Like that moment where she shoves the glass in his face, she lets out this very primal, very kind of sort of scream, and it's really horrible. I'm literally doing a very wimpier version of it, but part of me feels like that scream that she gives when she shoves the bit of broken glass into his neck, that's really horrifying. I literally had a moment where I was like, oh my god, did she just do that? And it's a really horrible moment, but it really is basically her way of basically gaining back her power, even though she feels like, because she's felt what it's like to lose control in both the scenes I've just mentioned, the subway scene and the scenes building up to that, where she's basically, having arguments with Mark. She's losing her sense of agency, a sense of self. Now, when she has this creature in her, life, she feels like she's gaining back control. But there are also theories to say that she didn't want to kill the private investigator. She was told by this apparition, who eventually takes on the form of her husband, Mark, to do it. And it's a very interesting idea, because to me I feel like the idea of losing control and literally projecting, there's two forms of possession: losing the sense of self-control, and also putting the value that you have of another person onto something else, or putting value of something and making it be a part of your everyday life, making it be your fixation, your obsession. And that's almost the thing that happens with Mark when he sees, when he sees the teaching assistant, and he almost, is projecting Anna's face onto her. It could almost be like a very psychological thing, hence why he reacts the way he does. But then a lot of people could say that, oh, it's very literal as well, because how do you explain all the other stuff that's going on? But it's all up to you, really. It's kind of like, this film feels like David Lynch's Lost Highway, where everything is played very literally, but it's a very psychological film. It's played very literally, but he's almost doing it with a relationship story. He's doing it with the relationship and the marriage breaking down. He's basically telling that kind of story, but with sort of like these very surreal elements thrown in. And it is very well done. It's very well thought out, and I really think this film should be seen. And the reason why I'm talking about this is because I recently just watched it for the first time, and I found it to be a really harrowing experience. And it's one of those films where I do have to give a trigger warning. If you are, say for example, about to have a baby, if you are about to get married, if you are about to move in with someone, and you've just started a relationship and you're just about to move in with someone, don't watch this film, because it will absolutely trigger a lot of emotions within you, and it will make you feel very, 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 very paranoid. So avoid this film if you're planning on getting married, having children, or about to start a relationship with someone. Avoid this film like the plague, because this film will definitely trigger a lot of very negative emotions within you, or make you feel very, very paranoid. So avoid this film if you're going through any of those things. But please watch this film if you want to see a example of a really good filmmaker really kind of just show us how you can take the darkest moments of your life and basically project them onto this very kind of dark, disturbing character drama about a deteriorating relationship. Because this film goes the whole 9 yards and then some. And it's a really beautifully shot film as well. Like, there's a lot of moments where I found myself going, this is a really gorgeous film to look at. And this film is very dark, it's very disturbing, and there are a lot of moments which I'm not really going to delve too much into detail, but there are moments where there are these really impressive long takes where characters will just do stuff, and you'll be following characters through a set. Like, even the very first scene in which this is utilised, like the scene where, Mark has been thrown out. He's been taken into sort of like this apartment building where he's just basically been living for 3 weeks. And he basically, just is stumbling down a hallway. Like, they're following him through this hallway, and you're feeling every stumble that he gives. Like, that the camera literally follows him when he stumbles. The camera literally follows him when he stops in a doorway and looks in. And the camera looks in a little bit, but it's only partially seen because, obviously we're seeing it from his point of view. And I really like that. I like the fact that you are almost put into the driver's seat of what it's like to psychologically be in the same place as these characters. And I like the fact, one of my favourite long takes is a scene where one of the people that she's having an affair with, Anna, has been attacked by her in the apartment, and there's this moment where he literally is running out of the apartment, and he gets a cloth, like a towel, and he's trying to wrap himself up so that he doesn't bleed to death, but then he's also running through the square all the way to the bar and everything like that. That entire long take shot was absolutely beautiful, and it really just shows how disorientating this film is. But I wouldn't recommend this film if it's for the faint of heart. If you're easily, upset by gore or violence or very extreme scenes, like the subway scene, I would highly recommend not watching this film because it will trigger you and it will make you very upset. But I would recommend watching it to people who really do want to see a very, grounded and a very realistic, surprisingly very realistic and very seriously taken story about a deteriorating relationship and what happens when you're in that position. And it really confronts what it's like to be in a relationship. How much of you, like I said, how much of you will be there still when it's all over? And that's something that's very important. And it's a very interesting film, and it ends in a very ambiguous way where you don't really quite know how to react to it. But in many ways, it could almost be seen as a happy ending, but in many ways, it could also be seen as a very negative ending. But I personally like to think of it as just an ending. It's just something that happens. And it has a very Lovecraftian feel to it, not just the tentacled creature that's, keeping Anna in check emotionally as well as psychologically, but also there's that element of you never really quite know what to make of the ending, and it's deliberately left up into the air for your own interpretation. And what I really like about a lot of the really good Lovecraft stories really give you a sense of unease, and I think this film's ending really does give you a sense of unease. But you could almost read into it that it could be almost like a metaphorically happy ending as well, because literally when the film ends, there is literally 2 versions of these characters that appear to each other. The teaching assistant, who's played by Isabella Adjani, is seeing to breakfast with Bob, and when they hear the doorbell go and the knock at the door, Bob is literally saying, "Don't let him in, don't let him in, don't let him inside, don't let him inside." And she's going, "Stop it, Bobby." And she's like, trying to get the door unlatched. And you just see, Sam Neill's character Mark, or his clone, basically just look inside, and he's like doing this, sort of like recreating the Human Centipede poster, like looking in and sort of like tilting his head and like looking in. And then, of course, the lights flicker, and then Bobby goes upstairs and he goes into the bathtub and he tries to drown himself. That's not a happy ending, obviously, but it really does kind of make you think. It really does make you think, and it really does make you go, okay, what am I supposed to make of this? And it's one of those endings where it is meant to be left open to your interpretation. Is this a positive ending, or is this a negative ending? Because you do hear all sorts of things in the background as well, like you hear sirens as well, you hear all sorts of different things going on. And it's such a very inventive ending, and I really just love it. And I felt like that's the reason why I wanted to make this review, is because of the ending itself. I feel like the ending is supposed to be an ending that is meant to be left up to your interpretation, but I think it could be seen as a very metaphorically negative ending. But then at the same time, I think personally, it's these two characters making peace with their situation. It's these two characters making peace with the fact that they're no longer in love anymore, and they're about to tell Bob that they're getting a divorce. That's what I think it is, and that they're separating, and Bob doesn't want to hear it, so he goes upstairs and he basically retreats into what he likes to do, which is basically going into the bathtub and proving that he can hold his breath for a very long period of time, because that's where his comfort is. That's where he feels, most happy, is when he's in the bath and his, parents are watching him, do the diving thing. So that's basically him. He's retreating into what makes him comfortable. He's not happy with the fact that his life's changing, so he's going upstairs. But even though it's a negative ending to Bob, with him literally going into the bath and drowning himself, it's a positive ending because it's these two characters. They've become untethered. They're now starting to, go out and live their lives as best they can. And it's sort of like reaffirming their agency, reaffirming their individuality without going into too much detail. And it can feel almost like an imposter syndrome element coming into play with, how Bob reacts to it. But that's how I decide to read it. On the surface, it could be seen as a very negative ending, but that's just literally how a child reacts to changes like a divorce happening. Like, it's a big deal to a kid. Whenever stuff like that happens, it's a really big deal to them. And I just think it's very well captured in a very kind of more, sort of like a visually and very almost metaphorically ambiguous way. But I think it's basically a child's reaction to him basically hearing from his parents that we're getting a divorce, we're separating, and he's doing what kids do best. He's basically he's basically running upstairs, jumping into the bathtub, and basically trying to pretend to hold his breath for a few hours, because that's his place of comfort. That's what he enjoys doing. So when he hears that his parents are getting a divorce, he's doing that. And of course, it's happy for the parents because now they get to live their best lives. They get to now be their individual selves again, but that doesn't mean they don't love Bob. But then people could always see that it's almost like a very sinister ending, because there's almost something supernatural, that her eyes glow when the lights flicker or something like that. But I think there could be multiple versions of it. So in the comments, I want you guys to do this now. I want you guys to ask me, if you have seen the film, what do you think the ending represents? And if you would like to see more videos, please give this video. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. And please be sure to subscribe for more videos and recommend your friends. Share this video around. And if you're looking forward to more videos, I have 2 videos on the way. I have one for Smile. It's going to be a double feature, and because it's Halloween, I wanted to do 2 double features this year, because I want to give you guys... There's a big old trick in Halloween tradition when it comes to doing trick-or-treating and things like that. They always have the phrase trick-or-treat, and I want to give you guys a treat, and I want to give you guys both a double feature, double special, where I'm doing both Smile and Smile 2, and I'm doing the original Halloween, the OG Halloween from 1978, and the 1982 sequel. And I hope you guys are looking forward to that, and if you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more, please subscribe to the YouTube channel today and get lots of insight into all sorts of other different videos that I'm doing. I've been doing stand-up comedy. I've got 3 videos on those, and I plan to fill it up with a whole lot more stand-up comedy videos, but I've also got Reader's Corner as well. So if you want to see all these other different reviews, please click the subscribe button today. There's an entire plethora of videos and topics that I talk about. So I hope you guys are doing very well. I hope you like this video, and I hope you're having a very good day. This has been Josh with Whims. Take care. Bye for now.